Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting close to the death of Joseph Smith. I ask you guys to hit that like, subscribe, of course the typical, but also consider becoming a patron on MythVision podcast to continue these endeavors in educating the general public. You guys can join for a very little amount each month. You could also do a one-time donation if you're interested to PayPal or even our Cash App. Love you guys. Check out the whole video. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert. We're getting close to the death of Joseph Smith, but we're not quite there yet. We have a few things we need to discuss, and we're going to squeeze a camel out of a gnat, okay? So get ready. I think this is going to be one of the more interesting moments where you guys are going to be finding out what's really playing out in history. And what I love about what Bryce and David are doing today and all throughout the series is they're kind of cutting through the baloney that is taught by the Mormon missionaries and letting you kind of make your own decision by considering there's another side of this. Yeah, they all claim to be martyrs and, oh, we were persecuted, this, that. But what about the other side? How often do you hear that side? Of course, the Mormons have a lot of money backing them with the church to teach their ideas and their propaganda. Not today, guys. Not today. Welcome to the show, Bryce Blankenagle and David Fitzgerald.
Woo-hoo. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got the host of a Naked Mormonism podcast. He is naked. That is not a debate. This is not up for dispute. And we have the author of The Mormons, if you will, the Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion, The Mormons. Show the book. I memorized it that time.
You did.
I started with the Mormons, but I did that on purpose. So there's the book, guys. Go get the book. Join their Patreon. Join our Patreon. Man, combined, I think you could pitch in like $5-10 and you'd have like all of us covered. And I want to mention that Bryce has levels, guys. So, you can always help him in what he's doing in his endeavors. I've got levels. David Fitzgerald doesn't know up from down on these things.
Shut up. I'm doing it.
Look, just help the guy out, okay? He needs help.
I just write books. I don't know this stuff.
I was just saying that to Bryce too. I said he can write books really good. There's something, right? So I can't wait, man. He's Joseph Smith is being introduced to an entire army, and they're actually being somewhat respectful to this guy in light of everything that he's done, and his soldiers are on watch. That's all I remember. So take us off from here.
Well, so I'm trying to figure, and we were discussing this talking shop before we hit the record button, of how much detail we really want to get into. Because we could spend, 4 more episodes on just laying out the groundwork for what happened between June 24th and June 27th. 3 days. We could easily spend 4 hours on just the events that transpired there. Or we can kill Joe today. I mean, that'd be fun too, right? So I'm kind of at a loss for the direction to take and the pace at which to take this, because there is so much material here. And, Derek, you kind of said this, like, missionaries aren't going to teach you this story. Yeah. They very much, Mormons know the Mormon side of this. I mean, from early Sunday school days in the church, you're taught the Carthage jail story. You're taught that Joseph Smith died a martyr for his beliefs. You're taught the Mormon side of this conflict. But you're given very little contextual information, and you are never introduced to the other power dynamics that are involved in this conflict and how close the state of Illinois was to teetering into civil war. And that's a point that's really important to note here, is tensions were so very high at this time between the Mormon and the non-Mormon settlements that everybody feared civil war was going to break out, and that the Mormons would, create a rebellion like they had done 6 years ago in Missouri. They had done it before. Why wouldn't they do it again? And they were more powerful now than they had ever been. They had more soldiers. They had more guns. They had cannons. They had a fortified, massive city, the largest city in the state. They were a terrifying force to contend with. And there aren't many analogies in the rest of American history.
Sure. And they're threatening to paint the whole country red.
Certainly. And everybody recognized this, right? And nobody knew this more than Thomas Ford himself knew this. And Thomas Ford is the governor of the state. And the politics was such that at the time in the 1840s, the governors were incredibly powerful. The federal government was significantly less powerful then as opposed to now. Governors were kings of their states, essentially. And Governor Thomas Ford recognized that he needed to handle all of these matters personally and that he needed to do whatever was necessary to diffuse the tensions. He petitioned Congress, as we discussed in the last episode, he petitioned Congress for 10,000 soldiers to help put down this rebellion, and that petition was rejected. I assume that Congress figured that if you can't handle this as a governor, then you're just going to get voted out, and whatever happens, happens. They didn't hold any love for this guy.
And it's doubtful that they had a spare 10,000 soldiers to be able to give to him, yeah.
That's fair. There was, the state of Western expansion in America in the 1830s. Right? I mean, this is only 6 years after the Black Hawk War. The state of expansion required soldiers to move into further and further expanding westward settlements in order to move natives to various reservations, to combat them, to murder their buffalo herds, to do whatever is necessary to continue to oppress and subjugate the Native Americans in order to make room for the western expansion of European settlers.
But that's a whole other podcast talk right there.
Right, but it is also notable that is all weighing into everybody's calculations here, and is also one of Joseph Smith's platform items, is that he would aggressively expand the westward expansion project.
And by platform, you mean his presidential platform, because lest we forget, he's running for president during all
He is running for president of the United States right now.
I love this show, man. Jesus didn't run for president in the first century. This guy, oh man. Oh, by the way, I figured I'd leave you something funny, guys, before we get any further. I interviewed the guy who claims to be Jesus from Australia the other day, and I haven't released it, but by the time this will be out, that video will be released. And we asked the question of where Muhammad was in the afterlife, where all these people were in the afterlife. And we got to Joseph Smith, and he's like, I don't know. Let me ask. This is what he did. He did this on camera, guys.
Oh, my God.
He literally turned his head and went, let me ask, where's Joseph Smith at? Oh, he's in the third rang of the heaven. And I stopped him. I said, sir, where did you just ask just now? Right now? He said, yeah, I just asked the spirits, and they told me. So he says that Joseph Smith is in the third rang of the hells, which is not an eternal single place that you burn at. You can work through. Yeah. You work through the levels. Like you continue your life after life, where you keep growing spiritually. And so
just like Jesus always taught in his real life. Yeah.
Right. Can you escape hell?
Yeah, you can climb your way.
Holy shit, really?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, this. I mean, if I'm doing what is it, Pascal's wager? Like, hey, this sounds pretty great.
And remember, this is all happening in an Australian accent, so it's even more awesome. It's like
even more awesome.
Dundee Jesus. Yeah.
It's truer from that. Yeah. It becomes truer by the accent.
That's not a Bible.
Tell it me.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to pick up on something you said earlier, and a lot of people point to this time of Joe's rapid expansionism and his very daring political machinations as like the time when he became a fallen prophet, and there I don't care much for those conversations because the term prophet doesn't mean anything, right? So he gave a speech just a month prior to being locked up in Carthage jail, and this was just a week and a half before the Nauvoo Expositor was going to be published. He knew that it was coming out. He knew that the dissension was growing. But he gave a public speech, and this is one of his final addresses, not his final, but one of. And he says, quote, "Come on, ye prosecutors, ye false swearers. All hell boil over. Ye burning mountains, roll down your lava. For I will come out on top at last. I have more to boast of than ever any man had. I am the only man that has ever been able to keep a whole church together since the days of Adam. A large majority of the whole has stood by me. Neither Paul, John, Peter, nor Jesus ever did it. I boast that no man ever did such a work as I. The followers of Jesus ran away from him, but the Latter-day Saints never ran away from me yet.
He is bigger than the Beatles.
Yeah, he's saying he's bigger than the Beatles at this point, right? And you know, this boasting, right? That's like very much a biblical no. You know, you can't boast, or you're not being a humble follower of God. But very much so, he sees himself as invincible, but also understands that the dissent that is growing is very much the only thing that's making him vulnerable, and he's scared of it.
Yeah.
Wow.
And all of this, you know, this is all right before the expositor and all of the events that transpired over the past couple episodes we've discussed happened. And you know, he proved himself not bigger than Jesus at this point.
Actually, Jesus, if there was a guy, was killed. So, you know.
Well, you know, the analogies all over the place, really. And so all of this is notable that, you know, Governor Ford was no idiot. He knew that his state was about to drop into chaos, and who knows what would happen after this. And I actually really enjoy reading from Thomas Ford. The guy is infinitely quotable about this whole period. And notably, after the assassinations happened, he was called into Congress to testify and give his view of the events and to provide all of the documents that he had available or he had retained from this entire conflict. And that transpired in, I believe, November or December of 1844. So, you know, 6 months after the actual assassination in Carthage. So he then took all of his materials that he presented to Congress and all of his contemporary notes and used that as the foundation to write his memoir, which was The History of Illinois, which discussed the history of Illinois as well as his role in all of the events of Illinois politics. So I lend a high degree of credibility to his accounts and to his information because, you know, the guy was being fed information from everybody. He was a scrupulous note taker. He retained everything with him, and he also kept a daily journal. So this guy, his account of the events really does serve to be one of the least biased sources that we have access to, as well as a contemporary source of the events and somebody who didn't hold a personal affinity for or a personal hatred towards Joseph Smith. Really a notable account from him.
And yet again, through all this, I'm thinking of the what ifs of history. What if he had managed to keep a little more hands-on of the actual affair? Like if he had stayed in the jail himself with his entourage and Joseph had never been lynched, but instead had gone to trial for treason and probably found guilty and hung. What would that have done to his church? It's
right. Yeah, there are a lot of debates in speculative history of what could have happened if Thomas Ford did this, or if Willard Richards did this, or if this, if that. And there are a lot of questions because there were some bad decisions that were made in this span of a week, right? From June 21st to June 27th, a lot of bad decisions were made. And there are no heroes in this story, right? This is history. It doesn't care about heroes. It doesn't care what we want. Now, granted, depending on how we feel about these various characters, we're going to be like, yeah, good job, or oh, you asshole, or whatever, right? But still, like, it is notable that, like, if you're looking for somebody who's like a stalwart, good guy in all of this, you're not going to find him. That's a mythical creature that doesn't exist.
You know, I never cared about Joseph Smith, honestly, till this episode that you actually, in a weird way, like I said with the shows, you grow an affinity. Like right now I'm watching The Punisher. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I just got done watching a different show, which was what's the devil one? He's a masked dude. Nope. It's a Daredevil. He doesn't kill people. Daredevil doesn't kill people. And I was like, okay. It was such a good show the way they played it. Punisher comes out, rips your throat out, crushes your skull. He kills people, and he has a good side to him though, but he's doing horrible, horrific things to bad people. Part of me is like, okay, you've made this character Joseph Smith into this weird, like, I like him, but I don't. He's a villain, but I like him in a weird way. Obviously he's nobody you'd want to actually be like, but
right.
You know, unless you listen to the other side, but you know,
certain people very much want to be like him, right?
Yeah.
And that's whether it's a believing Mormon and regards him as the highest spiritual aspiration figure. You know, whatever I can do to be more like Joseph is going to, you know, get me, you know, to higher leadership. Is maybe one day I can become the prophet. And it's, you know, as a kid, like that's what I believed, right? That's what I wanted. Those were values that were ingrained into me.
Wow.
Then there are other people who were very much like the real Joseph Smith, tyrants, who may study him the way that Joseph probably studied Napoleon and Muhammad to understand how they did what they did in order to gain as much human power as possible and to rule their own little fiefdom. Joseph Smith holds lessons for all of us, really.
So true.
In all of this, I want to pick up on Thomas Ford really quickly here, because he was kind of between a rock and a hard place. He didn't know exactly how to handle this situation, and he needed to be in all places at once in order to keep the peace. He understood that the militias that he had gathered from the nearby counties were all very hostile towards the Mormons, and that he was going to have a really hard time controlling them. He also knew that the Mormons were... I mean, in many respects, they were in defiance of all laws. They didn't operate by the laws of the land. They operated by the laws of the Lord. So he was in this dangerous situation where he's the executive of the state, but nobody's going to really do what he says. So what do you do in that situation where you know you can't control basically everybody around you? You know you can't control the fates of all of these people or their feelings towards each other. And him, you know, when Joseph and Hiram Smith surrendered and him walking them down and introducing them and handshaking with all of the soldiers there was an effort to humanize and to diffuse tensions. And many of Governor Ford's actions can be very easily explained by he was trying to diffuse the situation. Mormons will often ascribe malice to his actions, that it was calculated, that Governor Ford was actually colluding with people to get Joseph Smith assassinated. I don't think that that's very credible. I think that he was just trying to diffuse the situation by any means necessary. Yeah. So yeah, he walks these guys down all the ranks and introduces them as their military titles, because that's what this is. But he was also made aware that there were a lot of problems going on in Nauvoo that he needed to understand for himself. And these include the sex trafficking that's going on, that's reported in the Nauvoo Expositor and in Joseph Jackson's expose and in a number of published articles about the Mormons, that there's sex trafficking going on. That's not acceptable. So he needed to look into the counterfeiting. That was a huge problem, the sex trafficking, the claims that the city was put under martial law, and that political dissenters, people who were sympathetic with the anti-polygamy party, were arrested during the riot and that they were still held.
And just random travelers who happened to be caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah. If you were not a familiar face in Nauvoo, then you could just be arrested. So Governor Ford, he also wanted to learn the Mormon sentiment, because he had been exchanging letters with Joseph Smith. That was a good way to kind of get a finger on the pulse of the Mormons, but he wanted to go talk to them himself and see what is going on, why they feel this avarice for political control, why they feel this hatred for their non-Mormon neighbors, why they are able to skirt all of these laws, and how they are able to do what they do. He wanted to get actual eyes on the situation and hear the words from these people's mouths themselves. So he has to decide what to do, because if he leaves a huge division of the state militia in Carthage to guard the Carthage jail where the prisoners are, then he's responsible for feeding all of these troops and sustaining them. And also, the more you have a whole bunch of guys, the more likely it is that they're all going to get drunk and riled up and just kill Joseph and Hiram, right? That's more and more likely every minute. And notably, too, like Governor Ford brought his own posse of trusted advisors with him, and he has them constantly prowling the streets, listening to conversations, picking up documents that they can, meeting with people, and trying to get intel and funnel that all back to Governor Ford and tell him exactly what's going on. So he has, a small group of loyal people who are going to do what he says, but that's, 15 guys. Those 15 guys aren't going to control 1,300 militiamen who are hell-bent on vigilante justice.
Oh my
and none
God.
of them have telephones. None of them have cars. This is all old school. Yeah. Word of mouth, speed of a horse.
I guess, okay, because he's in jail in Carthage, which is obviously anti-Mormon territory, but he's protected in a sense. But this stuff's getting real heated quick. What's going on? Maybe we could take a snapshot into other areas and look at, like, what is the guy who's like his assassination best friend, assassination? What's his name again? Yeah, where is he at in this? What's going on with the Danites? What's up with the wife? Is there any of that stuff going on right now?
Yeah, so that's all really good questions. Porter Rockwell wanted to accompany Joseph Smith to Carthage. Porter Rockwell was very well known in Carthage by his face. People knew Porter Rockwell and knew that wherever he was, trouble was soon to follow. Joseph instructed Porter Rockwell in person, specifically, don't come to Carthage. Because Joe knew that Porter's presence there would make everybody else uneasy.
Yeah.
The wives as well. They are just in Nauvoo trying to just make do and just trying to go day to day while their husbands are in jail and just sending and receiving letters to the prisoners.
And up to this point, the city has been under siege right now, or at least preparing for siege.
Preparing for
so it's been very tense back in.
Yeah. And that, like, that's because of what Joe did. Right, Governor Ford gave Joe an ultimatum: surrender yourself or your city will be under siege. And Joe waffled about, he missed the deadline, and then he sent a letter a few hours after the deadline had passed, like, okay, we're coming, all right, it's all good, don't worry, no, don't send the guys.
Like, again, he was preparing for a siege, but his words were this extermination. It's going to be, people are going to be killed. He wasn't talking, we're going to surround you and wait it out. It was, nope, we're coming in and a lot of people are going to die.
So him being late, they still came and took over the city?
No, that was the threat, right? So they all understood. Joseph Smith himself understood, and his closest advisors understood that if he didn't surrender, then Nauvoo would become ash within a couple of days, right? They could possibly withstand a siege for a certain amount of time, but Nauvoo is also kind of a pretty open city. It has a lot of access points to try and guard. But let's also take stock of the advantage that the Mormons had in this situation. Should a military conflict arise, it would be very hard to try and blockade the Mississippi to limit the Mormons' ability to travel up and down the Mississippi to gather supplies. Let's say, total war breaks out between the Mormons and the non-Mormons. Civil war ultimately results. What the Mormons have all of the advantages. They have the location on the Mississippi where they can move troops, they can move supplies, they can move things up and down great distances under the cover of night without being patrolled. They have the ability to spread out into the local non-Mormon settlements and raid and pillage those for sustenance throughout the winter, right? Because this is June. Crops are in the ground. Farmers are working on pretty soon harvest season is going to come up. Everybody is always concerned with what are we going to do for the winter? Do we have enough supplies to get us through the winter? When the Mormons don't have enough supplies, they can just go steal those supplies. Whereas state militias need to have those supplies provided by state governments, or if the conflict gets big enough, federal government. And Thomas Ford had been told straight up, you're not getting our help. So he's trying to figure out how to sustain his people legally, his soldiers, while Joseph Smith doesn't have to worry about that. He doesn't have those constraints. Then there's also the concept that, Nauvoo is the motherland, and there are the non-Mormon settlements around, but there are also plenty of Mormon settlements around Nauvoo. So if Nauvoo is laid under siege by Illinois militiamen, suddenly that siege doesn't look so much like a siege as it does an ambush, because those non-Mormon or those Mormon settlements can rally their troops very quickly and then go surround the sieging forces and begin an attack and close in on the Illinois militiamen. So the Mormons have most of the advantages in this fight, and just sheer numbers and guns. They just have the advantages there as well. So Governor Ford is very aware that civil war would result in the Illinois state militia being dragged out into this very long fight and probably losing it. That's dangerous. And then what happens after that, right?
Yeah.
You got to feel for the guy. You got to feel for everybody in this situation. Like, what the hell do you do? What do you do? Where do you keep your guys? How many soldiers do you keep at each of these locations? Do you disarm all the Mormons? And then what happens if they resist the disarming? Do you disarm all of the militiamen of the Illinois militia and just hope that if everybody puts down their guns, that all tensions are going to boil off? What do you do?
And what happens if Joseph Smith's Nauvoo militia Legion comes in and stages a rescue? That's also a possibility.
That's a huge danger, a huge threat. And also one of the reasons why, Governor Ford, by the Nauvoo Charter, he's the commander-in-chief of the Nauvoo Legion. That's why one of the primary reasons he ordered them to be disbanded was, no matter what happens, you're not an official state-sanctioned militia. Yeah. If you look anything like that, of course, you're committing treason. You're a rebellion, and we get to do whatever we want after that.
Yeah.
So Governor Ford ultimately pulls the trigger, and he makes the decision to disband the Illinois militias. And he does this with the understanding that he himself and a small group of trusted advisors and a couple divisions of the Carthage Greys will be able to guard the city jail. And his logic is actually pretty sound in this, because he understands that with the prisoners in Carthage and with the Mormon sentiment against Carthage, because Carthage and Warsaw are the anti-Mormon hotbeds, right? Governor Ford understands that if anything bad happens to Joseph Smith, that the Mormons are immediately marching on Carthage, and Carthage is burned to the ground. So if you make it so citizens of the Carthage militia, the Carthage Greys, people who live in Carthage, are the ones guarding Joseph Smith, it's their houses and property and wives and children that stand in danger if anything bad happens to Joseph Smith. And Governor Ford considered that insurance enough against any assassination or vigilante justice. Clever guy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to also, I want to read from his history of Illinois, because, he's very poignant. And like I said, infinitely quotable. I'll read a few quotes from him. He says, quote, "What gave me greater confidence in the selection of this Carthage company as a prudent measure was that the selection was first suggested and urged by the brigadier general in command, which was one of his boys that he brought in from Springfield. Deming, who was well known to be utterly hostile to all mobocracy and violence towards the prisoners, and who was openly charged by the violent party with being on the side of the Mormons." So the guy that Governor Ford put in direct command, Deming, was somebody who the anti-Mormon militias had said, that guy's a Mormon sympathizer, get him out of here. And Thomas Ford is like, you're perfect for the job, Deming.
Yeah, we've seen Deming before in this story.
That's true. He's come up a few times, and he's a functioning piece of all of this puzzle. He's tasked with basically head of the security force for Joseph Smith, and pretty soon Governor Ford also tells Deming that if you're menaced by a superior force, then flee. And that superior force could be, the militia coming for vigilante justice, or the Mormons coming to break their boys out of prison.
And let me ask you this: why? And I know this is speculation, but why would, when you know that he's in this hotbed and it's a bad spot, why wouldn't you just extract the prisoners and take them somewhere else, like completely out of, toward the other side of the state or something?
Where are you going to take them? Yeah.
Where?
That's a great question, but I figure this guy's like breaking federal situations to a point where I don't know. I mean,
well, they can't just, everything they do is on foot or on horseback. They can't zip anybody anywhere.
I guess it wasn't that big of a deal to them in their minds.
So, consider the calculus, right? So if you're moving the prisoners, that's a great chance for either A, an assassination ambush, or B, an escape, right?
Yeah.
Notably as well, and Governor Ford speaks to this extensively, these charges are all based in the county of Hancock County. If he moves them out of Hancock County, then the charges no longer exist, right? So the justice needs to be executed in Hancock County.
No pun intended.
Whose county seat is Carthage, right? So in order for justice to be sought and taken care of, the case needs to remain in Hancock County. Now, Joe and his legal counsel, Orville Browning, petitioned Governor Ford to move everything to Springfield to try and get away from all the Mormon, anti-Mormon sentiment. Governor Ford says, this isn't my case. I have no say in this. You are charged in this county, and until the county justice remands the case or moves it or grants a transfer of the case to Springfield, I can't do anything. I am only here to make sure that the laws are executed properly. I mean, the executor of the state. And he talks about that repeatedly in his memoir. A little bit more of this. He goes on, it is true that at this time I had not believed or suspected that any attack was to be made upon the prisoners in that jail. It is true that I was aware that a great deal of hatred existed against them, and that that there were those who would do them an injury if they could. I had heard some threats being made, but none of an attack upon the prisoners whilst in the jail. These threats seemed to be made by individuals not acting in concert. They were no more than bluster, which might have been expected, and furnished no indication of numbers combining for this or any other purpose. So, like I said, Governor Ford's, he's got little birdies all over, and they're feeding him all this information. And he's like, a lot of people are talking about, murdering him in the jail, but like none of them seem to be like working together. There doesn't seem to be a plan right now. So I think we're good for at least a few days in all of this. He goes on to say, I must here be permitted to say also, and this shows the way that Governor Ford is being tugged and pulled by the Mormons and the anti-Mormons. He says, I must here be permitted to say also that frequent appeals had been made to me to make a clean and thorough work of the matter by exterminating the Mormons or expelling them from the state. An opinion seemed generally to prevail that this sanction of executive authority would legalize the act, and all persons of any influence, authority, or note who conversed with me on the subject frequently and repeatedly stated their total unwillingness to act without my direction or in any mode except according to law. This was a circumstance. So these militia commanders are like, hey, if you just say that the Mormons are in rebellion and that we can exterminate them, then we'll take care of this for you, Governor Ford. And he understands that they're not going to act until he gives them his seal of approval, which he refused to give.
He could have easily done some sneaky stuff here.
Yeah.
And there are allegations of that. We'll talk about those in a second. He says, this was a circumstance well calculated to conceal from me the secret machinations on foot. I had constantly contended against violent measures, and so had the brigadier general in command, that's Deming. And I am convinced that unusual pains were taken to conceal from both of us the secret measures resolved upon. It has been said, however, that some person named Levi Williams in a public speech at Carthage called for volunteers to murder the Smiths, and that I ought to have had him arrested. Whether such a speech was really made or not is yet unknown to me. And once again, this is the problem with information traveling at the speed of a horse. He's trying to do everything he can with as good information as possible, but he's also being fed a lot of lies.
Dude, okay, maybe we could talk about the speculation because what you're talking about, that there are speculations made, because to me, if I were in his shoes and I knew how clever these Mormons were, okay, and I'm not saying I'd want an all-out war. No, hell no. Who would? Think in his shoes. But would I want someone to take this asshole out? Or if it's like, Jew Kwindo and like these people who do Aikido and martial arts, you can do jujitsu and that's like strength versus strength. But Aikido is like when they go to attack, they're already giving you that energy, that momentum. You just step out of the way and things just happen. You're not wasting your own energy, and you're also not someone who's assaulted. You're not actively involved in enforcing anything. So you're kind of like, yeah, let's get out of here, man. You know what's going to happen. That's kind of what I'm thinking is about to happen, but that's just my speculation. I could be wrong. You guys know the material. I just know he dies. So I just want to know what you guys think.
Well, so everything you just said, there are a lot of allegations out there. And those allegations are used to pin this murder on Thomas Ford, right?
Right.
But once again, we have to understand, like you're saying, Derek, like there's so many ways to interpret what was going on, and like we have the documents of what is given to us, what was written in journals at the time, what was notes that were taken by Governor Ford himself or by Willard Richards, Joe's buddy at this time. We have notes from all of these people, but we also don't know what was said behind closed doors. We also don't know what was going on, what meetings were held in some prairie with the various militia commanders. Like, we don't know a lot of what happened, right? And that leaves up a lot for speculation and conjecture, which goes to say that there is evidence to claim that Governor Ford orchestrated this. I don't think it's credible personally. I think that he was just as caught off guard with the assassination as everybody else was.
Right. But you can totally see why in the aftermath of something like this, everyone's pointing fingers at everybody.
Of course.
He's as good a suspect as any. Yeah,
absolutely. Yep. And what's notable in this too, the Carthage Greys that Governor Ford is leaving in Carthage to guard, right? And it's a smart move to leave the citizens there to guard the prisoners. Because if something bad happens, their own stuff is dead. Is their own friends and family are dead. So he's smart enough to leave those guys there. But these guys are also really hostile to the Mormons. Really, really hostile. And in all of this mix, right? So initially, Joe came in with the people who were charged with inciting riot, which was about 18, 19 guys, right? And they're all staying at the tavern when they first arrived there, Hamilton's Tavern. And they're dealing with a lot of the anti-Mormons there, berating them and, being very aggressive. There aren't actual fights. There aren't actual, Bowie knives coming out and guns being discharged, but there are some scuffles, some brawls, some come at me bros.
Yeah.
And it becomes really, really hostile for the Mormons. So a court hearing was actually scheduled, which occurred on the 25th of June. And this hearing determined if there was enough evidence to charge or to begin the proceedings of charging the prisoners with these various offenses. And in all of this, all of the co-conspirators were essentially released on bail. Which meant that they could return to Nauvoo, and that the primary movers, who, these would stand like the highest charges if this were a RICO charge or something, right? The primary movers, the kingpins, are confined to Carthage jail because they were considered a flight risk, basically.
Right. And in this case, it's Hiram and Joseph. Yeah.
Yes, Hiram and Joseph, and a few, John Taylor is also mixed up in this as well. But those are the only guys who are actually charged with the inciting to riot. And then, as a result of that court hearing on the 25th, they're also charged with treason for implementing martial law in Nauvoo. Now, Governor Ford was convinced that this court process was going to take him well into 1845. He knew that in order to deal with this situation, he was going to have a constant guard on the jail for the next 9 months, and he knew that this is going to suck, right? He was ready for the long haul in all of this. But needless to say, he was trying to dwindle down and run basically a skeleton crew there, so it would be a smaller amount of money that he's taking from the state coffers in order to support these troops. Let me think here. So after that court of inquiry took place, and they were formally, charged with these things in order to be gone through into a jury trial in order for the state to begin collecting evidence for all of this, more and more of the Mormon guys who are trying to stay in Carthage are chased out. This includes Dan Jones, who was a ferry operator and a spy of Joseph Smith. This includes Stephen Markham, who was a confidant of Joseph Smith, as well as one of his money handler guys. These guys are operating as messengers for Joseph, and they're taking messages to and from Carthage and Nauvoo. They're prowling around town to eavesdrop on conversations to see how safe Joseph Smith is. They're trying to gather intel. And the Carthage Greys eventually become wise to what these guys are doing, and they chase them all out of town.
Yeah. And that couldn't have been pretty.
No, it wasn't. Dan Jones talks about how these guys all rallied around him, and they started, they pointed their bayonet rifles at him, and that they basically forced him onto a horse and chased him out of town one direction towards where another posse was coming into town that he didn't know about, that he almost ran into and suspected that they would have killed him. Stephen Markham, similarly, like he tried to leave with a message, and they were, they removed the message from his pocket and chased him out of town. They're very much, the tensions over the 25th and 26th are very, very intense. And the number of Mormon loyalists in Carthage is shrinking by the hour. To the point that by June 27th, the morning of June 27th, the only guys in town in Carthage who are Mormons are Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, John Taylor, and Willard Richards, and then a couple of guys named Cyrus Wheelock and John S. Fulmer. So these are our only 6 Mormons in town anymore. The walls are closing in.
How big is the population here in Carthage at the time?
I would say maybe 800 to 900 people, citizens who live there. County seat, but I mean, these are frontier towns. It's a relatively small town. Whereas the population of Nauvoo is something, the population of Nauvoo is somewhere between 12 and 15,000 people at this time, of which about 3,500 are soldiers.
Hold up.
Yeah.
Hold up. Damn. I mean, think about that for a second. You know what I mean? Like, they could have just went over there. They could have just went over there. How much? When did the? Is it senator?
Governor.
When did he leave, and how much window time before what we're going to be getting to Joseph Smith and him leaving? How many days were there in between that?
Window is getting very, very small.
Very small. Right. So Governor Ford, let me think. If I remember my dates correctly, he received the intel of the expositor and the riot and everything happening in Springfield on the 19th or 20th of June. And he immediately departs for Carthage, and he arrives on the 23rd. He sends the letter to Joseph Smith, surrender now or forever hold your peace. And that was executed on the 24th, which is the day that at basically 11:55 p.m., Joe and his, 17 buddies rode into town and agreed to surrender to arrest.
Yeah.
So then this court of inquiry happened on the 25th, which confined them to Carthage jail. And then through the 25th and the 26th, that's when all the Mormon friends, the Mormon sympathizers, and the Jack Mormons are being chased out. And Governor Ford is collecting information. He's disbanding the troops. He's trying to defuse the situation. And this is all a span of a week's time. That's it.
Yeah.
Do they get back into town and say, "We're in trouble, guys. We need to get our soldiers and go down there"?
Well, so there's a couple of points where this all kind of transpires, and decisions were made that people point back to and say, well, this is obviously evidence that Governor Ford just wanted Joseph put out of the way, right? So one of these is that Dan Jones, one of the Mormon sympathizers who was chased out at bayonet point, right? He vocalized to Governor Ford, met with him personally, and said, everybody's talking about assassination. You have to build up the number of people who are guarding the prison. Everybody is talking. If a moment passes that you're not watching, then they're going to assassinate the prophet. So Governor Ford is like, he's hearing all of the machinations that are going on. He hears what people are whispering. He's getting the Mormons and even Joseph Smith telling him that they're going to be assassinated. Governor Ford also sits down and meets with Joseph Smith personally and shares about an hour and a half conversation with him. And they determine kind of what to do. They explain to each other their perspectives. And Joseph didn't punch him in the face, so it must have gone well. But, so in all of this, right, like Ford is hearing so much about the assassination possibilities, but he's also thinking it's not going to happen. I have enough security. And like I said, he wants to go to Nauvoo himself for a few purposes: to investigate counterfeiting, to investigate sex trafficking, to figure out what the sentiment is, and to talk to the Mormons themselves, to give a speech to the Mormons. And he tells Joseph Smith, I'm going to go to Nauvoo on June 27th in the morning. I'm going to take you with me. And I want you to tell your people that what they are doing is dangerous, and that we're on the precipice of civil war, and that they need to lay down their weapons and not do anything that is aggressive. And Joseph Smith obviously agrees, because that's a chance for him to get out of jail and get into his Mormon stronghold.
Yet another what if of history. Yeah.
Yet another what if.
Oh my gosh.
So the morning of June 27th, Governor Ford receives intel or holds meetings or whatever the case is with his advisors, and he resolves not to bring Joseph Smith with him, and instead to leave Joseph, Hiram, the other prisoners in Carthage jail, and go with his own company of dragoons, just 20 soldiers, and go into Nauvoo.
I got to hear this.
Now, this is a dangerous time for Governor Ford, because information is at the speed of horseback. So the Mormons see a platoon of soldiers marching into town. How are they going to act? What are they going to do? Who knows what is going to happen? So Joseph Smith writes a letter to his wife, Emma, and a separate letter to
somebody else's wife.
Well, that was a little bit in the back of his mind at this very moment.
Yeah.
But he sends a couple of letters, and one of these goes to Emma, and it essentially says, well, let me just read a little bit of it. It says, the governor continues his courtesies and permits us to see our friends. I want to point out here, just a brief aside, Joseph Smith was very much being treated like a political criminal, not like a run-of-the-mill criminal.
Yeah.
He's being treated the way that like Roger Stone is right now, instead of like a violent criminal or somebody who's caught with a joint on them. So most prisoners, you get confined in jail. Maybe you get a visit from legal counsel. But you don't get visitors. You maybe get 2 square meals a day. You maybe have the freedom to roam around your cell if you're not chained down. But somebody who's a mafia boss, right? He's confined not in the jail cell, but in the apartment above, the debtor's prison. There are no bars on the windows. Right. There are no shackles. He's permitted a bunch of visitors constantly. He can have, meals, and he can have wine and tobacco delivered to him. He gets all of the pleasantries of being a high profile criminal.
Yeah. And he's actually living in the quarters of the jailer himself, is he not?
No, he's in the quarters of the jailer are downstairs, and actually, I did bring some exhibits here.
Oh, nice!
And these are from my own tour in Carthage, because I have been to Carthage a number of times. I absolutely love it there. So here's a picture of the outside of Carthage. Pull that screen over to the right screen. There we go. This is Carthage Jail. Here is this courtyard. This is owned by the church itself. Here's, our figures of Hiram and Joseph here, looking so brave and awesome. And, here's a little bit of, just some fawning over Joseph Smith. But here's the visitor center that's attached to the Carthage jail. And this is where you go in and you immediately enter the visitor center. And this is where missionaries chat you up and tell you all about the Carthage jail and everything that happened. And they have these wonderful portraits of the prophet and patriarch of the church with maybe a Jesus bust, but who really cares? This guy has way more to boast of than that guy.
Right.
So this is essentially the jail situation here. And the jail itself is this brick building. And this is the jail. This is not a recreation. This is the real building here. So when you walk in here, you get to see what the jail itself kind of looks like. And I do have some pictures, of course, me being dumb. But this is the downstairs of the jail. And this is the kitchen area when you first walk in. and just some little implements and some period era stuff. Some of it's recreation, some of it are authentic period era stuff. This is all the kitchen area. Then this is the downstairs apartment where the jailer himself lived, George Stiegel. That's his name. Then you go into the open area where there's the downstairs, and you can circle and you see these steps leading up right here. These are the steps leading up to the debtor's apartment as well as the prison, the actual dungeon. Here is basically just an overnight holding cell that's on the ground floor. Initially, the prisoners were committed here when they were thought that they were a danger, but this is ground level. And a gunshot could ring through that window and very easily hit any of them. So there were fears that could happen. And also these guys weren't necessarily feared to be escapees. So they were moved to the upstairs prison, which is, sorry, that's the downstairs prison. They were moved to the upstairs debtor's cell. Now, this is the actual dungeon. These are the prison cells that are next to the debtor's cell. And these are the stairs. You can see how narrow the staircase is. Once again, not a recreation. This is how narrow the staircase is, and this is my shoulder width, right? And I'm 6'1", kind of a large boned guy. It's basically impossible for me to go up the stairs against somebody to pass side by side. These stairs are incredibly narrow, but this is the debtor's prison here. And you can see it's a fairly large room. You got a desk. You got windows that go outside without bars on them. These are little areas. And once you come up the stairs, this is the walkway, right? This is the opening way. And if you're looking at this doorway right here, this is the doorway into the debtor's cell where these men were staying. Now here's the outside courthouse, right? So here's the window to the room of that debtor's prison where these guys are staying. And here's the jailer's quarters. The kitchen is right back here. So that hopefully gives us a little bit of context of kind of the visual of Carthage itself, what the building looks like.
Bryce, how much of a drop is it from that second story window to the hard ground?
It's I would say maybe a 10, 12-foot drop. Okay. From that second story window. Yeah. It's a big drop. And it's in the time it would have been dirt down here. It's all tiled courtyard now. But you saw, let me share the image again so you can properly see it. This wooden well right here is a wooden well that lives in infamy in Mormon history. This is quite a drop right here. This would all have been dirt. Here's the well that serviced the jail. So that gives us a general overview of what Carthage jail itself looks like. So Joseph sends a letter to Emma with Governor Ford is headed into Nauvoo, decides not to bring Joseph Smith along. Joe sends this letter to Emma and basically says, stand down. These guys are coming into town. This is not hostile. And he says the governor continues his courtesies and permits us to see our friends. We hear this morning governor will go down with his troops today to Nauvoo, so on and so forth. And he just gives some other stuff and talks about there's no danger of any exterminating order. So basically, like, Emma, it's going to be okay. We're going to get out of this. This is going to be a legal battle. I have really good lawyers, which Joe always had really good lawyers. Governor Ford is treating us well. He's ensured us our safety. He says, I think there's no danger of any problem, any assassination or anything, as long as you comply and your people don't do anything aggressive. We're going to get through this court hearing together. Just don't do anything dumb.
So I have to make a comment that I think is interesting on what you just brought up earlier, Bryce, and I'm going to side with you on this too, just from what I hear. There's so many different views about what was this guy up to, the governor. It sounds to me Joe would have been saying more if he felt threatened. Yeah. And if he sat an hour and a half with this guy, let me say something about Joe. I got to give one good compliment. This guy is a bullshitter. We all know that. Yep. But it takes a bullshitter to know a bullshitter. And he can, read through at least to some degree. Now, I would think he could tell if someone had ill intent toward him. At the same time, you could argue against me and say, yeah, well, the guy's buying, Reformed Egyptian Greek manuscripts. So, I'm trying to side with you here, but I'm also fighting myself in my head. But I don't know.
It's complicated, right?
Yeah, it's very complicated. I think we need to stick a fork in this, if you will, because there's so much you're about to bring in this final episode that's coming up. And I don't know, is this the cliffhanger?
I have a couple more points that I think we should get into really, really quickly. Really quickly.
There's no really with you, yeah.
So Governor Ford departs. He leaves around noon. It's going to take about 3 to 4 hours to get to Nauvoo.
And this is the noon of the 27th.
Noon of the 27th of June. So he heads to Nauvoo, and he receives messengers constantly coming to him during the journey and saying, something's up. This isn't good. You left town. The Carthage Greys are getting anxious. They're abusing the prisoners. Things are not good. Things are really, really not good. And Governor Ford realizes, okay, it's starting to be a lot of people who are saying this. This probably actually isn't that good. So he decides that they are going to stay 2 days in Nauvoo. He believes that they need 2 full days to decide everything, to gather intel, to collect affidavits, to find the damn counterfeiting machine that has been menacing these people for years now, to get, at least maybe hopefully some affidavits of the sex trafficking that's going on. They just need some time in Nauvoo. He says, we're going to need 2 days. During this journey to Nauvoo, it's going to take him from noon to about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He resolves, maybe not 2 days. Maybe that's not a great idea. He goes on to say, let's see. I myself entertained no suspicion of such an attack, at any rate, none before the next day in the afternoon, because it was notorious that we had departed from Carthage with the declared intent of being absent at least 2 days. Now, Governor Ford here basically puts his own life on the line as insurance for the prophet. He says, I could not believe that any person would attack the jail whilst we were in Nauvoo and thereby expose my life and the life of my companions to the sudden vengeance of the Mormons upon hearing of the death of their leaders. That's an interesting insurance. Like, hey, Governor Ford knows if Joe's murdered, the Mormons will immediately think Governor Ford orchestrated this and murder him in Nauvoo. And then the whole city, the whole state goes up in flames. That's the catalyst, right? That's the touching the torch to the powder barrel.
Oh, shit.
And I think he's reasonable. That's the thing, is I think he's reasonable in thinking that. The way I think he's reasonable in putting the Carthage Greys there to guard the jail. Yeah. He's a smart guy. He goes on, nevertheless, I sent back one company with a special order to Captain Smith to guard the jail strictly and at the peril of his life until my return. We proceeded on our journey 4 miles further, but by this time I had convinced myself that no attack would be made on the jail that day or night. So there could be a bit of sunk cost fallacy going into this as well. I suppose that a regard for my safety and the safety of my companions would prevent an attack until those to be engaged in it could be assured of our departure from Nauvoo. I still think that this ought to have appeared to me to be a reasonable supposition. Now, he's writing this, 8 years after these events transpired. Right. And yeah, I agree with him.
And everybody knows how to save the ship after it's sunk. But it's amazing to me when you see this situation in the moment, as it's unfolding, he doesn't have any really good options. He's making the best of some really bad options because, guarding this jail, you have to rely on guys. There aren't any neutral in this. There's no one who has no opinion about Joseph Smith. They're either devoted to him or they hate him, because he's about to throw the whole state, if not the whole country, into a civil war. So it's kind of fascinating to really appreciate how bad the situation is right now.
Absolutely. So Governor Ford realized he needed to expedite the trip. not make it 2 days. He says, I therefore determined at this point to omit making the search for the counterfeit money at Nauvoo and defer an examination of all the other abominations charged on that people in order to return to Carthage that same night, that I might be on the ground in person in time to prevent an attack upon the jail, if any had been meditated. To this end, we called a halt. The baggage wagons were ordered to remain where they were until toward evening and then return to Carthage. I point that as evidence that he very much did not collude in what happened that night, because he's getting this intel. He had convinced himself that no attack would be made, but he kept getting more and more people telling him, man, there's a lot of stuff going on in Carthage right now. And he decides, all right, we're cutting the trip short. We can deal with the counterfeit stuff and all the sex traffic. We can deal with that later. I got to get back to Carthage. And he ordered the baggage wagons to stop in the middle of the journey and said, we'll meet you on the way back. He changed his whole plan. So like, I don't see any malice or way to interpret his actions as malicious. He's just trying to do what he can to keep his people from killing each other.
Again, in hindsight, if he really was in league with the killers, Nauvoo is the last place he would want to be with a small force, Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence here that could be easily showing why would he collude? And, in real situations, we've all been in them, panic situations that are like real dire and like almost life or death.
Yeah.
When something changes from a direction that it's in, you're not hindsight, 2020. We're not seeing it the way today. We have all the time in the world to play the guessing game and all that. Like in the moment, you can't even, I bet you if we were in his shoes, we would laugh at the comments speculating that he was colluding probably. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Okay. Get on the wagon with me, buddy. You want to see what I'm talking about? Yeah. Because they were tricking me as I was leaving. Everything was cool. Everything was fine. I'm heading there. You think I'm going to head to them in light of this situation, knowing that they're about to possibly do something that they're going to regret? I don't know,
Yeah, well, and once again, you gotta like sympathize with him because everything that Governor Ford is dealing with right now is the same crap that Governor Boggs should have done 6 years ago, right? And Governor Boggs didn't do the things that Governor Ford did, and poor Rockwell almost killed him, right? Like, so Governor Ford,
it's a miracle he didn't. Yeah.
Governor Ford understands that his life is very much on the line in all of this. Not, that ignores the fact that his whole state is on the edge of civil war, right? Like we have like you said, Derek, like we can look back on this and be like, oh, bad decision. Oh, good decision. Oh, that was a smart thing. Oh, what? But like at the time, what the hell do you do? How do you deal with this situation?
Yeah. Thousands and thousands of Mormons. And this is crazy. The pressure's got to be on.
Yeah. So while all of this is going on in Carthage, the twin city of anti-Mormonism, Warsaw, has plenty of other stuff going on. Now, if we remember, Warsaw is where the Warsaw Signal is published. Now, Thomas Sharp is the guy who's the editor and publisher of Warsaw Signal. He's the guy who, when the first Mormon military parade came out, was like, whoa, not good, not good.
They got a cannon, man. They got a cannon.
And David, you read a quote from him last time, like calling for extermination.
In all caps.
Powder and ball.
Yeah.
All caps.
Yeah.
Thomas Sharp is, constantly publishing extras on the immediacy that he gets any intel. He's publishing an immediate extra that night to detail the anti-Mormon side of the events from the events of that day.
He has to order extra exclamation points because he's using so many.
That's true. He's running out of them. Yeah, and his periodicals, like he's a very quick-witted writer. He's fascinating to read, hilarious, and his satire, his level of satire is amazing. But there's not much satire. There's no comedy in what he's writing at this.
Oh yeah, no.
Every article he writes about the Mormons is very tongue-in-cheek, very hilarious. None of his stuff is comedy at this time. It's all dire. It is all calling for militias from the nearby cities and nearby states. He's calling for the Missourians to marshal together and come support in hopes that they won't be left alone to die in Warsaw, because Warsaw was, second on the chopping block after Carthage was in ashes. So Thomas Sharp also has a buddy named Levi Williams. Levi Williams is a member of the state militia. He is I believe, a colonel. Levi Williams is very much an anti-Mormon. Many runs in with the Mormons in the previous years. Very much hates them. One of the founding members of the anti-Mormon party with Thomas Sharp. So Thomas Sharp, Levi Williams. These guys are two peas in a pod. Just two total dicks who very much want to commit this war of extermination against the Mormons because they're afraid the Mormons are going to exterminate them. And their cities are the first on the chopping block. So Levi Williams receives the order from Governor Ford to disband his militia, and he calls a standing line and says, "We are marching to Carthage. All of those who are with me step forward." And about 150 men do. Thomas Sharp probably joins him in this and gives a speech to these men. So on the morning of 27th, these men are not a state-sanctioned militia. This is just a band of 150 to 200 men who are out for a stroll with their guns. Now, initially, they were headed to Nauvoo, but when they received the intel that Governor Ford was headed to Nauvoo without Joseph Smith, they turned for Carthage.
Yeah.
And they are on trajectory to arrive there at about 5 p.m. Now, in all of this, this is when Governor Ford arrives in Nauvoo, and he gives a speech to the Mormons. He talks about what's going on. He calls the Nauvoo Legion to band together so he can see them, so he can run through and issue orders to all of the ranks. And he wants to spend some time with all of these people and see exactly what is going on. So there's the Mormon account of what Thomas Ford said, and then there's Thomas Ford's account of what Thomas Ford said. And remarkably, there aren't really any discrepancies between them. It's just a matter of perspective between the versions of what he said. According to the Mormons, prepare your minds for the emergency. Another cause of excitement is the fact that you're having so many firearms. The public are afraid that you're going to use them against the government. Now, Thomas Ford is giving this speech to a few thousand Mormons, right? That picture we saw of Joseph Smith, the last public address with his sword drawn on the scaffolding, that's Thomas Ford right now, speaking to thousands of Mormons. And he says, the public are afraid you're going to use those firearms against the government. I know there's a great prejudice against you on account of your peculiar religion, but you ought to be praying saints, not military saints. Depend upon it. A little more misbehavior from the citizens, and the torch, which is now already lighted, will be applied. The city may be reduced to ashes, and extermination would inevitably follow. And it gave me great pain to think that there was so danger of so many innocent women and children of being exterminated. If anything of a serious character should befall the lives or property of the persons who are prosecuting your leaders, you will be held responsible.
It occurs to me, more than anything else, that may have been what prevented a civil war from breaking out after what happened the next day.
That and one letter as well. Absolutely.
Oh, shit.
And then, and he in his own version of this speech, he talks about, in this address, I stated to them and in what their functions had violated the laws. Also, the many scandalous reports in circulation against them, and that these reports, whether true or false, were generally believed by the people. I distinctly stated to them the amount of hatred and prejudice which prevailed everywhere against them and the causes of it at length. I also plainly told them emphatically that if any vengeance should be attempted openly or secretly against the persons or property of citizens who had taken part against their leaders, that the public hatred and excitement was such that thousands would assemble for the total destruction of their city. So both of these accounts say that Governor Ford told the Mormons, if any, there's a lot of people in this county who are prosecuting, who are going to be caught up in this legal battle over the next few months. If anything bad happens to them, the citizens are going to march into your town. They're going to kill you. Behave, and we won't murder you. Okay. All right. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
Now, let me think here, because I want to read another quote from Thomas Ford, and I need to find the quote, because it really summarizes this so very well. Okay, yeah, here we are. He says, during this address, some impatience and resentment were manifested by the Mormons at the recital of the various reports enumerating concerning them, which they strenuously and indignantly denied to be true. They claimed to be law-abiding citizens and insisted that as they looked to the law alone for their protection, so were they careful themselves to observe its provisions. Upon the conclusion of this address, I propose to take a vote on the question whether they would strictly observe the laws, even in opposition to their prophet and leaders. The vote was unanimous in favor of this proposition.
Wow.
Now, like that's really notable that, Governor Ford called on a vote to the Mormons. The law may not be what you want it to be, but I need you to support me. I need you to be upholders of the law and not flaunt the law in this, no matter what happens. And he claims that they voted unanimously in favor of it. Well,
and they probably did, because they're not big on split votes in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Now, I need to find just some more information here. Derek, you can cut this out if you want. But I'm trying to pull from 15 different sources here. So.
We're already like 11 minutes over the hour. Just saying.
Are we?
Saying.
Jesus, I cannot shut up. Well, and this stuff is so interesting. I can't get enough of it. I'm sorry.
I just figured you'd get. That's what I was going to say. Get a cliffhanger and then finish us out on the next episode.
Yeah.
And you can go into this detail. You know what I mean?
Right. So this here's the quote. He says, "The anti-Mormons contended that such a vote from the Mormons signified nothing, and truly the subsequent history of that people showed clearly that they were the loudest in their professions of attachment to the law whenever they were guilty of the greatest extravagances, and in fact." That they were so ignorant and stupid about matters of law that they had no means of judging the legality of their conduct, only as they were instructed by their spiritual leaders.
Wow.
And that really is the point, that the Mormons claim to be law-abiding, but they had no idea what they were talking about because they were believing in a version of reality that Joseph Smith told them. Yeah. And that was the problem. Joseph Smith is the agitator in all of this. None of this stuff happens without him. None of this civil war happens without him. None of the people being stolen from and the counterfeiting and the sex trafficking. None of this happens if Joseph Smith isn't who he is. And the people who follow him blindly are just as guilty of all of his crimes as he is, because they are following him thinking that they're on the right side of the law, but they are just believing in, let's just say, alternative facts.
And at the end of the day, stupid and evil pretty much become the same thing.
Yes. So Governor Ford holds a meeting in the Nauvoo mansion. Porter Rockwell hears the spies on the mission or on that meeting. We'll discuss that next time. And he leaves Nauvoo at between 6 and 7 p.m. And on his way back to Carthage, because he thinks an attack is imminent, he intercepts a messenger bearing the news that Joseph and Hiram Smith are dead.
Oh, crap. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you go down in the description. Help these guys out. Help us out. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. I know you guys want to see what this next episode holds. Of course, just as I do. And I'm really just blown away at how panicky this last situation is. But the church still goes on. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section. And I'm really excited to hear what you guys say. This is just like a TV show. It really is. I really do appreciate you guys, man. We got to make this happen. Yeah, for real. So thank you so much. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision.